Welcome to Charity Village Connects. I'm Mary Barrell. It's not news that nonprofits in Canada are notoriously slow when it comes to embracing new technology. Will they be left behind when it comes to the new AI tools that are already revolutionizing our world and our work? Well, not if we can help it. In this episode of Charity Village Connects, we're exploring practical ways with real world examples of how AI can be used by nonprofit organizations to streamline workflow, add efficiencies, and be used to complete repetitive tasks in order to free up humans for more important and impactful work. Is there a way to responsibly and effectively harness the power of AI for social good? To help us explore the potential and discuss the issues, please welcome Tim Lockie, CEO and founder of Now It Matters, now IT Matters, and the Human Stack, dedicated to helping nonprofits succeed with their technology. In 2021, Tim developed and launched Digital Guidance, a methodology designed to move nonprofits from tech resistant to tech resilient and transform the nonprofit industry into a human centered digital space. Tim believes that digital transformation is affordable and scalable with nonprofits of all sizes and is obsessed with the human stack. And he co hosts the podcast Why It Matters. Tim, welcome to our podcast, Charity Village Connects.
Thank you, Mary. It's so great to be here, and what a lovely introduction.
Oh, it's my pleasure indeed. I've been looking forward to speaking with you. Tim, your work with the Human Stack is all about putting people at the center of tech. When it comes to AI, what does that human first philosophy look like in action for nonprofits?
I think that it starts with a focus on human agency, not with efficiency. And I think this is where the conversation from the first step often gets off to the wrong step. And it's understandable, right? AI is a technology that is exploding. It is interesting. I spend hours in it every day. I'm really energized by it. But when I started to think about what was facing people that aren't like me, that don't love tech, and who may not want an AI world, I started to think we need models to help people find their path forward. And so I chose, for the model on that, I chose the 12 Steps program of powerlessness and finding agency in that, specifically with the Serenity Prayer. So I feel like the most important part of keeping AI in a human framework is to think of it as an agency for humans, idea or technology, or even more of a nervous system problem rather than an efficiency problem.
That's really fantastically interesting. By agency, for those who aren't in the tech world, what do you mean by that?
It's a good question that I've been getting a lot because I've been giving that answer. And I think it can mean a lot of things. So I'm going to start with what it doesn't mean. Maybe that's helpful. I think there's a temptation for us to be so action oriented that we think of power and choice in a way that says, if we don't have power, then we don't have agency or we don't have choices. But that's actually autonomy. When you lose power, you lose autonomy. And that's a problem. I'm not saying that that's not a good thing. But agency is actually that part of you that you hold on to no matter how little power you have. You might not like the options. You might not like what you are forced to choose and accept, but you still have the option to respond rather than to react. And I think for me, when I talk about agency in terms of AI, what I focus on the most is, are we leaving ourselves in a position where we can respond to AI, the advantages it has, the risks that we encounter with it, the nature of AI, the impact it's having on the world, both good and bad? Are we able to respond to those areas, or are we putting ourselves in a position where we're being reactive, either reacting by creating an emotional dependence on one side of things, or reacting by saying, I'm never going to use AI. I'm not even going to think about it. I don't want to know about it. And I think that what the world needs, what nonprofits especially need, and leaders most of all, is an approach to AI that centers around how do I respond to the risks and to the benefits and to the needs of my staff, to the needs of our mission and impact. How do I respond to that in a way that's authentic and that is responsible and beneficial?
And one of the things we're trying to explore in this episode of Charity Village Connects is really about providing nonprofits with a vision as to how they can take the next step, how they can bravely embrace AI. And I'm curious whether you have one or two case studies or examples where a nonprofit has used AI in a way that's both practical and impactful and giving it agency, and whether you could provide sort of an overview of the lessons that other organizations could take from those examples.
Dan Kershaw at the Furniture Bank in Toronto comes to mind. If you know Dan, you just know the man is so alive with creativity, with curiosity, and he's just committed to finding ways forward for the Furniture Bank in whatever tool and vehicle he can find. And when I met Dan and started talking with him about how he was using AI, he was using it really effectively. I love the campaign that he has done where he used images to identify and show people what it's like for families that don't have furniture in their home. And there's an ethical dilemma that impact organizations face where they want to show people a reality without demeaning the people that are in that reality. Dan used AI to show that using AI images at a time where it was actually really difficult to generate quality AI images. And he really worked hard to get that down and create a campaign that was just astounding. It created such a visceral response to a problem that's very real. I think that's a great example. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward, not fancy, not huge automation, just an idea about how do we solve this issue with an ethical dilemma in a way that's responsible and ethical. And so I think he's a great example. Another example would be there's a community foundation that I've done some work with. They had been trying to create an AI policy for months. They had just gotten stuck on several areas, and a lot of nonprofits are uh, really not sure how to proceed when it comes to an AI policy. And so they were working on this. They'd worked on it for several months, didn't know what to do with it. I came in and gave some guidance on that. Their COO is fantastic. Took what I had said and made it go way further. It's an incredible policy that they've made. And when we rolled that training out, before we even got to the training, because that policy had identified that using Google Gemini was within their existing cybersecurity and data privacy work, they could actually use their data in a safe and ethical way. They saved $25,000 in 5 minutes by creating a deep research report on a housing coalition project that they had been working on that would have taken 3 weeks by a consulting firm. Got it done in 5 minutes. It was really high quality, worked really well. That was before we did the training. And so their organization has actually saved a lot of other time and work. But what really worked for them was centering on here's how we're going to proceed together, clarifying as a team that would happen. And after that had happened, it really set the floor for people to just learn and explore how they could use it.
Well, you mentioned ethical concerns and how both of those organizations addressed them and did so effectively in the process of working with AI. And I'm curious, we certainly hear from the nonprofit sector at large in Canada that ethical concerns are front and center in the AI conversation, especially in sectors that serve vulnerable populations. And it's one of the reasons why they tend to resist exploring AI. And I wonder if you could provide some overview of what should nonprofits be considering around ethical concerns, but specifically around data privacy, bias, community trust when adopting AI tools. What are the practical things that they can do to help them overcome their own resistance and fears and be able to feel confident in that they're using it appropriately?
Great question. I'm so glad that you're thinking about this question because it's so important. And I want to start by saying part of responsible use, maybe even ethical use, is finding ways that you can do new things that you couldn't do before that help populations that you couldn't help before. Great example of this is language translation. I know that this has been such a huge issue for small nonprofits that serve participants that have multiple languages, and it is so expensive to create all of your content and materials in multiple languages for people. Not That's before you get to auditory and video translations as well. Those are now possible to do in a way that hasn't been possible before. In Google Meet now, you can have a meeting in one language for one person and another language for another person, and it is doing that real-time translation. I think one of the pitfalls that we can fall into as a value-based industry is to worry so much about the ethical side of risk that we don't think about the ethical side of benefits. And so one of the first things I want to say is we need to balance out the risks with benefits and say it is important to look at both sides of that. So that's the first thing that I would say. The second thing I would say on that is to understand where there are societal and ethical risks that no matter what you do to participate in AI, your organization and your participation will not make an outcome or an effect or change that reality. And I think that one of the work I've done in creating this framework has been to decide the difference between things that we need to accept, things that we need to have the courage to change, and the wisdom to know the difference. And that is what is so challenging about these ethical dilemmas that we find ourselves in. And one way to say it really simply is where there are ethical considerations around AI, like implicit bias in training models, which you can't do anything about, we can still advocate for that. We need to, but we need to understand that our participation in AI won't change that reality. And so I think for leaders especially, we need to focus on the ethical risks and concerns that are inside of our organizations that we can do something about, and we need to focus on those first and foremost. And I'll tell you, one of the most important ones is two-factor authentication. We're really worried about data getting into training like the models, which is actually less of a risk, much, much less of a risk than just cybersecurity of people reusing passwords and not turning on two-factor authentication. So I think we need to also ground our actions in real in real actions that we can take that are going to mitigate risks that we can change. And I think that's the most important part, is to draw the line between what are the things that we can change, what are the things that we can't change, and especially to avoid the illusion of control, where we think that our actions that we take would affect something at a societal level that frankly most nonprofit organizations aren't large enough to change. I don't want that to feel like a cop out, Mary, because I worry about that answer because I don't want it to sound like I'm so positive about AI that I just think it should be used all the time and we shouldn't be concerned about it. I just want us to be really clear about how to be concerned about it.
Well, I've heard from other experts that really the train has left the station and that the real risks will be in what happens if you don't figure out how to use AI in terms of your productivity and the service that you're providing the communities that you serve. And I presume you have an opinion of that kind as well.
I do. And in my work, I think if I took a technologist point of view on that, I would say absolutely, trains left the station. Unfortunately, you don't get an option to live in a world without AI. It is going to be here. It's going to be here forever. It is like the invention of money, the invention of the internet. Like they're so big, they're not either good or bad. They are just significant shifts in technology that are here to stay. On the human side of my work, the thing that I stress the most is I want people to have the tools to choose the level of participation that is in alignment with their nervous system, their ethical beliefs, and what they think is good or bad. For some people, that means they're just not participating. I support that. What I don't support is people not participating or avoiding it without really understanding what they aren't participating in and what they're avoiding. That's the thing that I feel so passionate about. And I feel like that is a missing piece in the conversation right now, that it is here to stay. It's not going anywhere. And still people do have a choice and need to execute that choice with wisdom.
And you mentioned that, we've talked in not in tech generally, not just in AI, but how it can impact. Of course, the software developers' own biases can be incorporated into how the software works, and it certainly would be true in AI, as we know. And in your work, how have you seen AI either support or unintentionally undermine core values like equity, accessibility, and inclusion? What safeguards can organizations put in place?
Oh, that is a big question. Um,
We're about the big
I
questions here at
I know. I appreciate it. I like it. Like, yeah, these are the right questions to be asking. So I'm so grateful that you're asking them. The way that bias shows up in these systems is important to understand. So AI is just math. It's just math that is running lots of times based on lots of historical data. This is one of the only places that they found where there's no evidence of diminishing returns on in the level of intelligence and quality of intelligence if you give more data and more tests to an AI. The machine learning keeps learning more and more. That learning had to start someplace, and so it started where it was the easiest available to find, which is all digitized information, which is basically the internet. And the internet it wasn't developed to be unbiased. It just was unbiased because of privilege. And that's a reality. And so I think I want to remove the idea of intention from this and focus on that as an outcome, because I feel like that helps the conversation move forward. So I just want to start with that. I would also say that where organizations will run into this is where they are working in areas that have had less documentation traditionally. So, things like finance, science, business, all of these things have had so much writing around them that it's really easy to find data for that. The nonprofit space has not had that same level of documentation. So it's already harder to find that kind of data for good training. So one other element to this is it's not just that the bias is implicit, it's that the data is incomplete as well. And so I think that that's important to understand. What safeguards can you put on that? Read everything before you post it is one of the most important things. I also feel like it's important to say humans are rife with inconsistencies and opinions, and we hallucinate intentionally and unintentionally, actually more than AI at this point, and that's part of what makes us human. It is not that we're trying to be perfect and that humans are good and AI is implicitly biased. Now, humans are implicitly biased as well. Some of the ways that we're implicitly biased are actually making the world better, and some of them are not. The more self-awareness we show up with and the more organizational self-awareness organizations have, the better they can spot that and the better they can figure out how to use AI in a way that's going to enhance the best parts of that.
And what about other ethical concerns, such as impacts on the environment? How can nonprofits carefully consider these issues? Can they find a way to use AI that balances the immense power with the potential drawbacks? And, I've heard stories about the huge amount of electricity, for example, that AI is going to be requiring in the future, and the impact on our environment from that regard. I'm curious what your thoughts are around that.
Um, so I want to be really clear about what I'm saying here when I say what I say next, which is that this is a massive global concern that we need regulations to step in and safeguard and do something about. And my country is doing exactly the opposite. And that is a really bad deal for all of us. So I want to be really clear about my general stance on government regulation in general about AI, and the pace at which we are scaling AI relative to the pace that we are looking at all ethical and safety externalities. And the investment is way, way more on the scale side than the safety side. That's its own problem. However, when it comes to the nonprofit industry, if we all used AI and got it and really adopted it, especially in Canada, if all the Canadian charities got together and used AI all the time, it would not put a significant dent into that environmental impact, because the rest of the world is using AI at such a greater degree than charities, that I don't think our lack of participation will actually make a dent in the environment. And I think the second thing to say on that is we can only alter the or affect the intentional use of AI, but almost all the digital systems that we're using now are getting built with AI in it. So we don't even have the option to not be using it. So I feel like, yes, this is a big problem. I don't think that the responsible use of AI and the beneficial use of AI for charities is actually, I think that I think it would be better for nonprofits to use AI, and that will outweigh the negative impacts of the environment. Um, that I do not have numbers on that. That is what I've talked about. I've talked about this with multiple environmental groups around AI. They don't disagree with that assessment, so I'd be open to hearing otherwise. That is what seems right to me.
Well, I want to move from those great big questions to some practical ones. And the first one off the top of my head is really, I've those that are, um, I guess, qualified and have some expertise in AI and actually have been able to use it, like Dan Kershaw and yourself, talks about, training AI to serve you within your organization based on your mission and your goals. What does that mean to the average person who may not be totally tech savvy to understand the actual training, not just of the people who are going to use AI, but the AI itself? Can you explain that to people?
I was just thinking about this with your podcast because I was looking at it right before I hopped in here. And I think one easy way to think about this is you've interviewed a lot of really interesting people who have said some really interesting things on really important topics. If you took all the transcripts from all of the podcasts that you've had and you just put those into a Google Drive, right? Transcript those, you put those in a folder, and then you put that folder into a custom chat GPT, or you put that into a notebook LM. I use a system called Cassidy a lot. Um, you could then ask all sorts of questions about this podcast and who said what. And when you talk about the topics of fundraising, it would identify the people that spoke about fundraising and what they said. You could tell it to create a table of everybody that's been on the podcast, um, by order of their middle name if you wanted to, right? You could find all of their LinkedIn profiles as well. So that level of organizational conversion from raw data of transcripts into structured data that is usable by anybody in plain language is a very new reality that and it sounds really complicated to train a model or to train an AI. All it really means is uploading it. Like we should just start saying upload this information because we all understand that, but that's really what training is. Is that helpful? There's so much more to say about that. I could talk about this for an hour, but I just want to create an example that's very tangible.
Right, and I've played with AI, and what I find interesting is, the prompts are so critically important in terms of what the product will be. If my prompts are not, or my instructions are not clear, precise, I can get really weird results. And because I'm a journalist and a lawyer, I try to be really careful about checking all my sources and relying on information. So I actually get the AI to provide me with its references that they've been consulting to provide me the answers that I've asked them. But I guess I'm not even clear on how one trains oneself to actually be really good at giving prompts to AI to get effective results that one can put considerable trust in. Notwithstanding, one should always double check.
Can I just ask what AI systems you like using the most?
Well, I've only tried two, and that's the paid Chat GPT
Mhm.
and Copilot.
And Copilot. Okay, great. Yeah. Um, and I think one of the answers to that is is to think about what outcome are you looking for, and the more clear you can be about what it is that you want, the better it's going to be, right? So when I think about AI, I think about it as like a drive-through restaurant, like Mark's drive-through, right? And if you drive up to Mark's drive-through and you order food, you'll get food when you go to the window, and it might be like a banana and yogurt. I don't know if they even serve those, but whatever. It's going to be something they're going to choose for you, and who knows how good it's going to be. If you order, I want uh, I want a double burger with bacon, barbecue sauce, grilled onions, raw jalapenos on a whole wheat bun, right? With curly fries and barbecue sauce, which is, by the way, probably what I would order. You're going to get a very different experience than if you just order food. And I think one of the things that happens is that the more you order, the more you know what you like, the more you know how to order it, and the more you go to different drive-throughs, like if you go to Taco Bell, and you're trying to get a burger, it's not going to go as well, right? So knowing when you go to Copilot, you're going to ask Copilot certain types of questions that are probably going to be more pointed. They're going to be a little bit easier. They're going to be less creative. They're going to rely on other work that you've got in there, that's related to documents and files that you have in your system, right? And that's what it's really good at. If you want somebody to act more like a personal assistant, you're going to ask ChatGPT, maybe even verbally, right? That's because they are different drive-throughs. They offer different food. So I love Claude for a writer. I think it's the smartest one. So if you want a really good writer, that's a great one. It's like a professor that says, "I'm out of tokens. Like no more questions till 10 p.m." Right? But really really good answers. ChatGPT is a great virtual assistant. I use it as a thought partner all the time. Perplexity is probably one that you would love as a lawyer and writer because it is so focused on sources and creates all of those sources in them. So I think some of it is knowing which ones to go to for what, and then also just being aware what options do you have when you're ordering, right? So I want a summary, that's very different than I want an outline, which is different than I want a poem, which is different than I want a table. All of those actually make your prompts more rich.
And where do you find out about what AI products uh, can do for the best, which ones are leaders in what kind of genre, or what kind of particular task that you're working on. How do you discover that?
There's my answer and what I think other people should answer. So other people should find someone like me or me, which would be fine, and ask directly. And keep asking because AI is changing so fast. What I'm saying this year would be different than what I will say next year, almost for sure. For myself, I spend hours trying all sorts of tools. I just let curiosity lead. I listen to a lot of industry leaders. Whenever they say a tool, I go try it out. For some reason, I'm really good at assessing quickly what a technology can and can't do and seeing a lot of the possibilities so I can digest that quickly. I think having someone, and I think it is a person that you trust with that level of information, is probably the best way to go, because this is moving so fast that you really need someone that is investing a lot of time to try a lot of things to see how it works. I think that's the best way at this point.
That's great. No, that's very, very helpful, practical advice. We know that capacity can be one of the most challenging barriers to nonprofit tech adoption. How can organizations with limited staff and funding begin to experiment with AI in a low risk, high value way?
The policy is the most important thing because policy is what gives people permission to use it. So what happened right now and where we find ourselves, I find this with a lot of Canadian charities that I work with, is that when ChatGPT came out in late 2022, by spring of 2023, every board was saying you've got to have an AI policy that says never use this stuff, right? And for a lot of different reasons, you need to be transparent about it. You can't put anything in a public LLM, whatever that means. And so we ended up in 2023 with very restrictive, reactive policies that I don't fault people for. Like, it was a very new thing. It was just out. It makes sense. But things have changed since then. We know a lot more. And it's really time to turn those policies from restrictive and reactive to responsive and a lot more aware of what the options are. So the first thing is, without policy providing permission for staff to use it, they can't move forward. I would say in terms of how to shift your policy, don't focus on transparency of using AI, right? Like, where people are saying if you use an AI for anything, you have to tell everybody. I mean, that's not true of Grammarly, right? Like, if you use Grammarly, which is an AI tool, you don't have to tell everybody, hey, I made this document with Grammarly. So we kind of know that at this point. Instead, focus on accountability. Say you're like everything. If you use a spreadsheet, if you use a word processor, if you use AI, you're accountable for what you produce and you need to own that. So that's what I would say. Focus on those areas of policy. The second thing is use what you're paying for. And this is the big cheat code. Every organization I've talked to is either in Microsoft or Google. And when people say what should our base model for our organization be, it is either Copilot or Gemini, depending on which of those you have. And the reason why is you're already paying for them. You can upskill everybody on your team right now on the 20 things everybody should know how to do with AI. And you can do that with no extra cost and no extra cybersecurity or data privacy risk because you've already accepted the risk of having your data in their cloud. And their enterprise level uh, AI security and the way that they train their models is already meeting the rigorous guidelines of what nonprofits need. So that's my big cheat code is use what you're paying for and let people know that they can use it that way.
And what are some practical entry level use cases for AI in nonprofit operations that an organization could implement in a matter of weeks rather than years, and really get their, dip their toe into it, and let their staff and the leadership also do the same?
Yeah, I think that I think the playbook here is you've got to unlock leaders first so that they're aware of what can be done with it and they're behind it. If leaders are not, if leaders don't want their staff to use AI, they need to be explicit about that, and staff need to actually follow those guidelines. So the most important thing is to decide what level of permission exists and how do we make that explicit. Without that, we're living in a don't ask, don't tell world that is really unnerving for staff, right? So the first thing is to unlock leaders and unlock permission. The second step is to upskill everybody. Host a training, have the people that have been using it, whether they're supposed to or not, have them show everybody what they're doing with it, and just take an hour, provide lunch, have people see what can be done with it. If you want to go one step further and be more structured about it, hire someone like me to come in and do a training to say, here's the 20 things everybody should know how to do on Gemini, right? And here's the framework to understand how AI is affecting us and what we should do. And now your turn, you explain the policy for your team, right? That's what I do for a lot of organizations, just to set the bar where everybody knows it. And then the third thing, and this is really important, don't get fancy with AI until you've done those two steps. And if you start by trying to get really fancy with a model and build stuff out, you're putting the cart before the horse. And that is where I see time and time again, organizations have these big backfires. And if you work where you unlock leaders, upskill staff, and then upgrade your tech last, things will work really well. If you go the other direction, any other order, things will kind of fall apart pretty quickly.
Hmm. Well, I've talked to other experts who have actually echoed what you're saying about ensuring that you have a policy in place, and that the policy in place has to evolve from what it may have started out being, if you had one, which was don't use it at all, because the danger is they're going to use it anyway because it's everywhere. It's in every piece of software that could possibly be used in an office setting or in an organizational setting. So what are the risks if you don't let them actually disclose that they're using it, and give them guidelines on how to properly use it?
Oh, I love this question. Thank you for asking. The biggest risk is if you don't give people permission, they won't pay for it, right? And when they aren't paying for it, they're going to find efficient ways to fundraise. They're going to find efficient ways to use volunteer management options. They will be efficient with the jobs that they have, and there's no way to be efficient with AI without putting in that data, right? So if you are not paying for models, if you're not saying use these ones for work, they're going to be using free models, and they're probably not going to be turning off the data sharing, and maybe not even the data privacy issues or the cybersecurity issues. So you're opening yourself up in a major way to not provide people a path to use efficient tools that they know how to use because they're using it in their personal lives all the time. So I think that the biggest risk is if you don't define it, people will use models where it is the least expensive. The second outcome from that, by the way, is that you do get what you pay for with AI, and you get much, much better responses and results if you're paying for that AI. Much, much better.
And what are some of the biggest misconceptions you see among nonprofit leaders, and how can they stay grounded in their actual needs, where they can marry AI to their strategy rather than seeing AI as a strategy in and of itself?
AI governance, hands down. This is the biggest issue in tech in general, is focusing on installing tech instead of having more conversations, right? So the most important part of this, and the highest misconception, I think, and I think this is fairly universal, is to see AI as a technology and not a new conversation on tools that you can use. And I will guarantee you, organizations that increase the quantity and quality of conversations around the use of information and intelligence will outperform other organizations that may have invested more in tools, because what is going to matter in the future is your ability to adapt as a team. And that is really, really challenging. So I think hands down, the most important thing is to have more conversations, develop a very solid AI governance uh, methodology and practical roles and responsibilities. That's kind of a boring answer though, and I know that because really the fun answer is you want to find ways that you can really expand what you can do with AI. So I would say like after you've done the AI governance, focus on grant writing. So it's a real win for people. You can reuse a lot of what you used on the previous grant for this one. That's tedious for humans and really fast for AI. You can use it for communications and marketing really, really effectively. And especially, as you know, marketing is such a numbers game, and you have to pay attention to all these tiny little details that are really annoying. But if you dial that in and have an LLM and an automation that's taking care of that, you can see profound differences rapidly. And this is especially true with small teams. So I would focus on those two areas. And then the third one, I would focus on leaders getting coaching on how to use the data that lives in their system and find ways for executive leadership to be asking questions of that data in really simple ways. This has been the missing link from CRMs and fundraising systems is getting that information all the way up to the executive team. And now for the first time, it's relatively easy to get that information all the way up. You throw a lot of your donor data into uh, Google Deep Research. Is that safe to do? Yes, because it's in the Google Cloud. It is part of what you're paying for. You ask it all sorts of questions. You put that into a document once a week. Leaders can ask questions about that all week. Next one is there next week and is creating a chain of these. So that's a really practical way to get leaders and executives insight they've never been able to get before. I'm curious because you've asked others. I'm curious what other people are saying about this.
Well, I think what they're, depending on their usage, like they're not necessarily in your role in terms of giving advice. They're actually in the actual sector using AI or our tech, but not doing the kind of direct work with nonprofits necessarily. So it's varied. But what you've echoed a lot in principle of what I've heard as well. But you say it very effectively. So thank you for making it so much easier to understand. I'm curious as well how nonprofit leaders can ensure AI tools are effectively integrated into their workflows in a way that enhances impact rather than becoming a distraction or a siloed project. Like, how do they? You've talked about Dan Kershaw, and we've been lucky enough to be able to follow his amazing exploration of AI in the work that his incredible charity does, Furniture Bank, and that journey has been evolving quite remarkably since the first time I spoke to him in 2023. Um, but for someone who hasn't really embraced it in such a meaningful way as Dan Kershaw, what kind of advice or, I guess leadership guidance would you offer them to do that?
I tell a lot of leaders to be curious. This is so there's a lot of conversation around AI skills. I think those are really important. But the three most important competencies in AI work are risk mitigation, and that's focusing on risks of your organization. And the second is optimization. This is how do you maximize all the positive things that you can do. And the most important one is in between those two, and is curiosity. The more you can find ways that you personally, as a leader, are curious about what it can do, the better you're going to integrate this into other areas of your organization. And that might sound a little ethereal because what does the personal curiosity of one leader have to do with a fundraiser that might be really AI resistant, right? When leaders are curious, they become a symbol of what's expected and accepted. So when you talk with other staff at Furniture Bank, maybe another Daniel that works there is as interested in AI as Dan Kershaw, but almost nobody else is. But the organization itself identifies as AI forward because of Dan. And I think this is something that leaders miss, and they miss it with information systems all the time. People are watching the way that you think about information systems, the way you talk about them, and that creates the culture. And the culture is the most important integration source when it comes to these kinds of tools. Because when people feel supported and encouraged, and they can engage, and engagement is what really creates that kind of efficiency. Because think of it this way, if you had one person or three people at the top that used AI, that would be good. Maybe you could get a lot of workflows happening. But if you took everybody else in the organization and you just gave them basic literacy, they're going to integrate that into their workflows, and they're going to know how to integrate those better than anybody else. And if they do that inside of tools you're providing, when they either move to a new position or transition on, they can effectively say, here's all the prompts I use, here's how I do this quickly, here you go, here's the cheat sheet, and now someone else is working just as efficiently.
So, if a nonprofit leader is listening right now and feeling, whoa, I am really overwhelmed, what is the first mindset shift? Well, you've mentioned curiosity, but does that come with a practical step that you'd encourage them to take in approaching AI thoughtfully?
Yep. AI, for whatever reason, and I think this is an interesting thing. I don't know if you follow Mallory Erickson, who does some of the most interesting work around fundraising and nervous system. And I've been talking with her for years about the links between fundraisers and technologists in nonprofits. There's some really interesting parallels there. But AI is a nervous system technology. We don't think of it that way, but it really, really is. So the first thing I would say is, if you're feeling overwhelmed, that's normal. That's a normal response. Just stop and take a deep breath. Like, it's going to be fine. You don't have to get this right away. You can relax into this. If it sounds confusing, everything that you've learned in life sounded confusing at some point. So that's okay. That's part of the process. It's normal. So that's the first thing I would say. The second thing I'd say is, if you've never tried any AI tools, go to either Copilot or Gemini in your own system. And if you don't know how to get there, ask somebody or Google it. It's fine. And then type in, what are 10 challenges facing whatever your role is, my role, at whatever your organization name is, in whatever location you're in, right? So for me, that would be, what are 10 challenges facing the CEO of the Human Stack in Bozeman, Montana? And then just hit enter and read through those 10 responses and identify how many of those responses are relevant. How many of them reflect something that is actually a major challenge that you have? And how well did it do? You're going to find probably it's going to be between 7 and 9 of those are relevant. And if you just stop and think about that, you just identified 7 to 9 things. It's actually 8.5, because I've done this a lot of times with groups and I've measured it, and it's surprisingly accurate. And if you just think about what that means for a minute, what that means is that with no context except knowing someone's role, their organization, and their location, you can pinpoint a lot of the challenge that a lot of challenges that they're facing. And if you're a leader that really cares about your people, this is where being nervous system and drawing from empathy. If you really care about your people and you're wondering, I don't know what to do with my about our volunteer manager. She's really struggling right now. She's got a lot going on. She's about to hit maternity leave. Our funding is down. She's having to do more with our volunteers. If you put that prompt in for your program or your volunteer manager, you could get kind of a bird's eye view on what that program manager is experiencing right now. And in just 2 prompts, you've already seen, this is relevant to my work, right? That's where I would start. I would just start like finding out if it's relevant. And if it's 1 out of 10, then maybe leave AI alone. It's not really that helpful. But I feel like over and over, people have found this pretty helpful when they've done it.
Well, I'm going to try it as soon as we're finished here myself. So, thank you, Tim, for sharing your insights and advice to Canadian nonprofits struggling to learn how to harness the power of AI for their own purpose driven work and helping us keep humans at the center of tech generally and AI specifically. Thank you for joining us on Charity Village Connects.
Thanks so much for having me.